welcome to Normal Island Live. I'm Curtis Daly, and for once, I can say we're not late because of our fault. Navarro media started at 6:30, so we thought we'd wait until that finishes and some people can jump over. But I'm very excited to be joined tonight by the one and only Helena, aka NoJusticeMTG. Helena, how are you? How have you enjoyed this heat wave?
It's been great. I am one of the very few people who absolutely loves the heat. I'd actually just been on holiday the week before as well. I went to Mallorca for a bit when it was raining in Nottingham throughout the entirety of the 4 days that I was away. And the day I come back to the UK, immediately there's a heat wave. I'm just like, clearly something is smiling on me. Someone up there is smiling on me because, again, I absolutely adore it being sweltering hot. I love that shit.
Do you know what? I'm the kind of person that likes 25 degrees. Anything over, I struggle with. But it's been fine, actually. I haven't struggled too much. I mean, I went out on Saturday and went to a park, Round Hay Park, for those that live in Leeds. Beautiful it is. But to be fair, I stayed under the shade. I don't like it when sun's beaming on me. I don't know if you're the same, that you like to prefer to have the shade or not, but it gets too hot.
I know.
Um,
I would spend all of the time when I was away just lying in the direct sunshine on the beach, and then I went to the pub and then was sitting with a pint of Coke, to be fair, home drink in the sunshine. So I'm absolutely, I love the beaming heat, which is bad because I actually burn really easily. I'm sure everyone's noticed on my channel.
Yeah, I mean the time when you came on after it was really hot in Nottingham, wasn't it? You were completely burnt, which was
I
very
went to
fun.
cricket. I went to the
Yeah, it's
cricket at
cricket,
fucking
wasn't
Edgbaston in Birmingham, and just you don't expect to need sun cream in the UK. And that's all I'm saying.
Well, I mean the climate has been changing, and clearly we need lots of cream now. But like we kind of forget about climate change for a second to enjoy the heat, but it's very much real, despite people on Twitter and stuff saying it's not. But this is what we've got coming up tonight's show. We are going to be discussing reform wanting to scrap taxes on overtime, an open letter to the government on British Israelis fighting for the IDF, with an exclusive interview with John McAvoy from the Declassified. And we asked the question, are the Green Party working class? Now, if you support what we do, we are not funded by big donations. We are all voluntary. You could go to turndeafmedia.co.uk/supports. There is a link to our Patreon or another link to our one-off donation. Of course, you can also become a YouTube member for 99p. We rely on small donations to continue, and what you've given over the years has been fantastic, but this is how we keep going, and this is how we keep growing. But let's go on to our first story. The Reform Party may have come up with one of their wackiest policies yet, but on the surface, it sounds quite good. The party announced that they plan to abolish taxes on overtime pay. Again, it sounds like a really good policy, but the party also seemingly drew inspiration from Donald Trump. The no tax on overtime rule allowed WT workers to avoid paying federal income tax on their extra pay they earned from overtime. It was a temporary tax deduction that applied only to the overtime premium required under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, what that basically means is the premium is the extra allowance for working overtime. For example, if you earned time and a half, only that extra half is tax exempt. Now, Reform is proposing all overtime over 40 hours is exempt for tax for those who earn under £75,000 a year. Now, why is this a bad policy? I mean, surely it's a tax break for workers. Why would the left be against this? Do we hate the working class? Well, first of all, according to Reform, they estimate the policy would cost £5 billion annually, and the party will pay for it, you guessed it, by slashing welfare. As if welfare hasn't been slashed enough. Specifically, they plan to target disability benefits. Secondly, it's a policy that comes with a multitude of problems, including a cliff edge. Take someone on £60,000 salary who has £14,999 overtime. Their total pay will be £74,999, and their overtime will be income tax free. Sounds great, right? But give them a £1 pay rise and exemption would just disappear. Their tax and NIC bill would jump up by about £6,000. The marginal tax rate on that final pound would be 600,000%. That is not a typo. They would have to earn £85,000 before they were back in the same financial position. A policy supposedly designed to reward hard work would, at this £75,000 point, punish it catastrophically. Then, here's an obvious equity problem. Imagine two plumbers, both working 50 hours a week and both earning 50 grand, but one has 50 contracted hours and the other has 40 contracted hours plus 10 hours of overtime. The second will be £5,000 better off under this proposal. That makes no sense. So what will the first do? Obviously try to change their contracts. They won't work a single additional hour, but will suddenly have 10 hours magically labelled overtime. The £5 billion figure reform claims it will cost. In reality, it's going to cost a lot more. And who's going to pay for it? We will, through cuts to spending. This policy clearly hasn't been thought out. In fact, a similar policy was introduced in France, only to be quickly scrapped. It also poses another question. If you're contracted to work 30 hours and you work 35 hours, is that extra 5 hours tax-free? Well, to be honest, it looks like it won't be, since it's not above 40 hours. Reform have said, okay, tax-free overtime above 40 hours. So this could mean those who work less than 40 hours are worse off than those who work more. And surely a tax system is supposed to help those who are struggling. Helena, do you think this was simply an ill thought out policy, or is this a cover for reform to roll back the state?
I mean, I think probably a subset of both, really. I mean, I think that broadly looking, as you say, towards a taxing less on working people, lowering taxes for people who go out and actually do a job, actually get paid PAYE, is something that's going to be politically really savvy for Reform UK. At the last general election, whilst not many people who are of working age supported Reform UK, and still on current polling, most people who vote for Reform are of retirement age, the people who do still vote for Reform of working age, outside of immigration, the biggest policy in 2024 that they marked as their reason for wanting to vote for reform was their supposed increase of the tax-free threshold for people who earn under £20,000 a year to essentially not pay any tax on income at all. It would have cost a huge amount, it would have stripped back the state, but it was a very politically savvy and politically popular one, obviously significantly less affordable in terms of state provision than what we're seeing with this new policy proposal, which is far less ambitious. And the thing as well is that when you are cutting taxation for people on the lower end of the scale, and you are doing that at the same time as you are cutting services that is provided by the state, the people who mostly rely on those services are people on the lower end of the income spectrum, people who earn a lot more likely to pay to go private, less likely to just broadly need the help of the state, whether that is welfare or the provision of public services or any kind of assistance in that regard. They're less likely to need it. So cutting taxes for people who need the things that the state provides by cutting those things ends up as a wash anyway. And broadly, I think that playing into this idea that we should just be paying less tax as working people anyway, I think is a hide into nothing, outside of the utility of needing to have public services that are functional. On top of this, taxation is a social contract for society. Everyone should feel like they should at least contribute somewhat, even if broadly as left-wing as we agree that the rich should pay significantly more and wealth should be taxed much more greatly than we currently are doing so. We shouldn't be taxing working people more if we're not at a significantly higher level taxing people who don't work even greater than that to provide a much greater state to be able to decrease inequality. The idea that tax should be something that somebody else pays, I think is a really, really bad route to go down, as it means that we can never justify tax increases, which are going to happen. Lots of the kind of discourse that you have about whether or not taxes should go up or not. From the right, you hear, well, taxes have never been higher. And I'm like, well, the necessity of state provision has never been higher because we have an aging population. So we can't really justify having lower taxes when every other country broadly in Western Europe have accepted the taxes are going to have to go up. If you have, 2 pensioners to every 1 working person, whereas previously 5 working people to every pensioner. Sorry, the other way around, two working person for each pensioner, which is significantly less sustainable in terms of productive capacity. Now, I think the angle that's been going with here is, well, if you incentivize people to do more overtime, you increase productive capacity, and that probably is true. But we should be trying to increase that through, more industrial investment. I think state-led investment would be a much better way of doing that than just trying to tell people that the problem with the economy, you're not doing enough overtime. sure, we'll reward you for doing it, but you should be working more than 40 hours a week. And I'm like, well, actually, I don't agree with that. People should have more downtime. And if we're going to find a way of being able to encouraging more productivity, then we should try and get those from people who could be working more hours, but if they had more state provision for childcare or more provision for other things that's stopping them from working currently through targeted income support or targeted workplace support, much better way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, at the last election, there were many people I spoke to, and the thing that jumped out was the increasing the tax threshold to £20,000 a year. That is a overnight retail offer to people. Like, someone's life would change, and not dramatically, but your taxes will be cut overnight. You can see how that's appealing. In this instance, once again, it's a tangible retail offer. Of course, we know the negative effects. You know, it will be massive amounts of austerity to pay for it. But again, for people, that's a retail offer to say, oh my God, my overtime is going to be tax free. I guess my question is, because I do think it's kind of politically savvy. One is obviously it's pitting working class people and unemployed people against each other because they said they're going to use it, they're going to cut welfare to pay for this. But do you think this also puts the left in a very difficult position? Because among many things, the left economic policy is popular. People want to tax the rich. People want public ownership. People want investment. No one likes privatization. Do you think the right wing pushing their tax cut agenda, okay, they're not just talking about tax cuts for the rich, but, you know, for ordinary working class people, could this really stunt a left wing political project? And do you think we may be facing a significant problem where you've kind of got left populism? And I know we don't really think it's right-wing populism, but let's just presume we're not a leftist and it's in the eyes of, you know, the ordinary person. You've got right-wing populism, which is cut taxes for you. Does that make our left populist argument more difficult? Because before we could say the establishment wants this and we're anti-establishment, we want this. Now we've got right-wingers saying you get to have tax-free overtime and the lefties don't want you having that.
I mean, I think you're right. I think it is a problem. And one of the big problems is for too long, a bunch of left-wingers have again treated tax as something somebody else pays. Whilst, again, all of us agree with taxing the rich. We haven't had the hard conversations about the necessity of taxation. This obviously doesn't fund public services. You and I both agree, I think. The money for central government financing comes directly from the central bank. Taxation is a means with which that you reduce inflation by quelling demand during times of an overheated economy. But broadly, this will mean that to ensure those things don't happen, taxation broadly mirrors some kind of level of day-to-day spending. It doesn't have to, and you can stimulate the economy in times of economic weakness, and I think we should be doing that right now, but it's not, obviously, you will still have to have some level of taxation. You can't just not tax anybody, right? That's a thing that does have to happen more broadly. I think we all agree with that. It's important to lay that out there, but at no point have we managed to make the case for the public that, again, paying taxation is good because it's part of a social contract. We have already ignored a bunch of those arguments in favour, I think, of more populist arguments about taxing the rich because it's a way of avoiding taxing everybody else. When in reality, I think we need to tax the rich, as has been pointed out by Gary Stevenson, to reduce inequality. It's not about funding the state. This is about making sure that rich people aren't hoarding all of the assets and to liquidate some of those in order to pay those wealth taxes. But in order to ensure in some future overheated economy, the way you quell demand when inflation is high is by taxing people who spend their money on commodities in the economy, which will involve taxing working people. If we haven't made that argument, we won't be able to do that very easily, incised by an insurgent right wing who says that we're going to cut everybody's taxes. Because it's worth pointing out, working class people in the UK pay significantly lower taxes than places in Europe.
Yes, yeah.
Higher wage earners, like people who pay significantly above the median wage, people who earn six figures, pay a higher marginal rate of tax than a lot of other European countries because working people in those countries pay a significant amount less in terms of like local and regional taxes as well, on top of how much we currently pay in the UK, as well as there being federal taxes in European countries too. And again, if we make our tax system too lopsided, I'm not worried about billionaires leaving, I'm not worried about businesses leaving. We have a big economy that want access to that economy. But we're already seeing doctors leave because we're not paying them enough in this country. So they're going to Australia where they get paid more and their taxes are lower. That I think that highly paid PAYE earners are going to be the squeezed people who we should be worried about losing, rather than, landlords and institutional investors, again, people who are extractive from the economy and don't even really pay many taxes anyway.
So this is the difficult thing I find, though, because I I agree with you that taxes are actually quite low. You know, if you compare us to Europe, we actually pay quite low taxes. You know, 20%, and this is the bracket I'm in. 20% really isn't that much. Like, if you think about what you're getting for that 20%, it's a bang for your buck. But the difficulty for the left is not only could we be facing a populist right wing that says we can cut your taxes, but ultimately as the left, we have to argue for higher taxes. How do we do that? Because at the moment, I think I agree with you. Yes, taxes don't fund public spending, but that doesn't mean that you can just get rid of taxes. Of course, you absolutely need taxation to control spending. Okay, and of course to control inflation. And of course, if you want to spend even more money, you still need to raise taxes because, of course, inflation is still going to factor into this, even if we were to spend more money. So I want to ask you, how does the left respond, either policy or rhetoric? And I don't mean even for like the next 5 years, you know, a Green Party prospectus. I mean, maybe a 10, 15, 20-year political project from the left. Do we need to have some kind of New Deal? I say New Deal as if, you know, we're American. It would make sense if we were in the US with a New Deal. But a New Deal where we say, okay, like everyone's taxes is going to go up. The basic rate is 25% taxes. However, we're actually going to have more services that are free at the point of use. Maybe it's free buses. I don't know what it is. Do we need to do something drastic like that? Because I worry that if we say, look, in order to just keep funding what we have right now, taxes may eventually need to go up. I fear that's not going to convince many people against potentially a rising tide of reform or right-wing parties saying, we're going to cut your taxes.
I think we need to have a significantly impactful redistributive taxation first. I think the way that you make sure that people can consent to higher taxes is if you've shown that the people who are, again, who we are painting rightly as the enemy in this scenario. We're populists, we do believe in there being an unaccountable elite, and it is the billionaire class, it's the oligarchs, right? And if you don't take them on first, if you don't find a political prospectus that holds them accountable first in terms of the level of state ownership and which has been siphoned off into their pockets, both through their political engagement and through the ideological kind of pitch that's been rolled by Thatcherism over the last 45 years, you won't be able to undo anything. Again, you're asking for people on the lower end to pay first to then tax them later. Once we've redistributed from the rich to the poor, I think they'll be far more likely to accept a higher tax economy. But we need to obviously have some home truths, I think, more on a broader scale in terms of what an aging population will do to taxation. For example, right, this argument's been made across Europe and they've accepted that. We've not accepted it here. Because no one talks about it in terms of how it affects taxes. So much so, people genuinely believe that our taxes are higher in this country because we have migration, when the opposite is true. If we get rid of migrants, if we reduce our working age population, the ratio of workers to pensioners will be lower, meaning we'll have to pay even more taxes to be able to fund, or not even fund, but to have the capacity to be able to fund the pension system that we have. And that's an argument, again, that needs to be made on a more honest level, on a national level, rather than expecting that we can just tax cut our way and there'll be no negative externalities. Because I guess the easiest argument is that we already have a case study of cutting taxes to cut spending to unleash the private sector or whatever it is. That was the coalition government from 2010 to 2015. The Lib Dems are principally responsible for increasing the tax-free threshold. Did that make our state more dynamic? Did that make us a growing economy? Did that help poorer people? It doesn't look like it to me.
It didn't. But do you think people still fondly look at that policy? I know no one looks at the coalition fondly, but do you think if you were to ask the average person, would they say, well, that was a good thing, you know, raising the threshold? Because I know there's left-wing arguments to reduce that threshold again. Again, like I feel like it's a difficult argument, and I support it.
That's true.
Like,
I'm not saying that we should reduce the tax-free threshold again. I'm not saying we should be taxing like poorer people more. I just think that further reducing the amount of tax that we get in terms of PAYE just because it's popular, I think that would be that's a bad route to go down. I think it's a bad route to go down.
No,
also,
I
want
agree.
to point out, by the way, like in the kind of press release, I believe that Reform UK was speaking to the BBC about this policy, the tax cut for overtime. They specifically said they would look at changing working time regulations that we inherited from the European Union now that we're post Brexit. One of those things is called the Working Time Directive, which means that unless you opt out of the Working Time Directive, you can't be forced by your employer to work more than 48 hours a week. And that's the kind of regulation that Reform UK say they want to scrap in a
Yeah.
post-Brexit arrangement, right? Looks very similar to that policy from the Greeks about working 6 hours a week that I was mentioning, or 6 days a week I was mentioning before earlier in the stream. And currently, we're protected from being forced to work 55 hours a week unless we opt into doing so. Seems like that's the kind of thing that Reform would want to ensure was normalised. You can roll the pitch for it by saying working more hours is great because you're going to get taxed less. But suddenly employers are now forcing you to do that extra work because they want to extract more time out of you and have to hire somebody else. You know, that's where I think they're trying to Trojan horse this policy towards.
Yeah, it's that I think it's the rolling back of the state, and it is trying to create a Singapore-style economy, as they say, or maybe a
But
Greek-style
without all the
economy is
council
better.
housing.
Better we're doing it without the council housing, of course, or a Greek-style economy, which just literally works to a drop. You know, the 40-hour week is it's too much of a luxury for workers, which is crazy in a world in which the ultra rich are richer than ever. For me, though, what I would like to see, and this is not, I'm not saying it's completely realistic in terms of the next 5 years, but I think we should be thinking big in the next 20 years to have a British New Deal, even call it the British New Deal, akin to Clement Attlee and FDR, which is like everyone's taxes goes up and maybe the base rate is 25%, but you know, you have an entire new social contract which says absolutely zero privatization. That's gone. Okay, you're gonna have an NHS that is funded for the rest of your life. Okay, no more cutbacks, no more waiting lists. You are going to have maybe free broadband, just the basic level, maybe free buses, something like that. So where you could say to the people, yes, your tax are going to go up, but this is also free, and you're going to get this. You know, a
Exactly, yeah.
million more council houses. I think that should be the big left wing project, which I appreciate can't be done in a maybe a manifesto or before the next general election from the Greens. Maybe
Also,
I don't
one
know.
thing I
Maybe they
would say
could,
as
but
well is that there was a Corbyn era policy, we've talked about it on stream a lot, I think it's a really good policy called inclusive ownership funds, which
oh
essentially
yeah,
gives
yeah, yeah.
workers some level of controlling share stake in the businesses that they work in. You remember, if you're a shareholder in the business that you work in, you then get paid out remuneration in the form of dividends from being a shareholder in the business, right? Any New Deal project to the left, I think, has to include that.
Yep.
Sure, your taxes are going to go up, but you are going to get paid out more as now a co-owner of the business that you work in, right? You're getting some of that repaid through dividends paid out to you, given that we have brought a bunch of these companies into worker ownership. I think that's a good way of being able to change that dynamic round.
Yeah, that's also interesting because when we talk about like worker ownership democracy, like maybe the big thing to fight back against this like right wing populism isn't just to say, here's our tax and spend policy, but actually we need ownership. Like look at the world in which we've created with AI and stuff. Which, to be fair, which gives us more of a route towards talking about actual socialism. So thinking big, I think, is the one. We've spent so much time on this story, but still on the first story is 8:10, so we are going to swiftly move on. Onto a second story. How many people in this country are part of an organization who have committed war crimes? Did you walk past someone on the street who may have been complicit in breaking international law? Well, over 2,000 British people have served in the IDF, according to a Freedom of Information request obtained by Declassified UK, which they published back in February. Now, an open letter organised by DCUK and the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, along with signatories from 60 MPs, journalists, and human rights lawyers. They are calling on the government to ensure that British Israelis who return to the UK disclose any involvement with the IDF. An interesting inconsistency has been pointed out by Sangeeta Maiska, writing in The Nerve, and she said this. There is the question of consistency. British nationals who go to fight in Ukraine are given a start warning on the Foreign Office website. If you travel to Ukraine to fight or to assist others engaged in the war, your activities may amount to offences under UK legislation. You could be prosecuted on your return to the UK. There's no secret that the government fully backs Ukraine after the invasion from Russia, but even our government would hold those to account who go and fight for Ukraine. Of course, in that caveat, probably suggests if you go and fight for the Russians. But I digress. They are, in this instance, saying if you commit war crimes or you are part of an army that's committing war crimes, you'll be held accountable. But not if you fight for the IDF. Now, it was recently announced that the Met Police would not investigate any Brit who fought for Israel. Why won't the Met investigate? Could it be this reason? Met Police linked to Israel as it gears up for pro-Palestine protests. Senior Metropolitan Police officers are regular attendees at think tank closely tied to Israel's military and intelligence services and have accepted hospitality from its embassy in London. Earlier today, I caught up with the Classified UK's John McAvoy to discuss. So DC UK, along with the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, organised an open letter to the Home Secretary in regards to British people serving in the IDF. Can you tell me what the demands of the letter are?
Yeah, of course. They're very simple demands. And to be honest, it's astonishing that the UK government is not already doing them. And the first one is simply to track how many IDF soldiers are returning from Israel to the UK. The second one is to subject them to secondary screening, those who have fought for the IDF, have served in the IDF, and assess whether they've been involved in war crimes, crimes against humanity, indeed genocide in Gaza. And the third call is to support robust and independent investigations in line with the UK government's obligations under domestic and international law with regards to the prevention of war crimes and also to ensure justice for Palestinians. As I said, these are very simple requests. The UK government could implement them tomorrow if it wanted to. The problem is obviously one of political will.
So how did you obtain the information in regards to thousands of British people serving in the IDF? You put out an article, I believe, in February, or over the last couple of months, to be honest. There's been thousands of British Israelis fighting in the IDF, allegedly anyway. So how did you get this information?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, over 2,000 British Israeli dual nationals or people with British Israeli and one or many other nationalities have served for the IDF amid the Gaza genocide. Now, as I mentioned in response to the first question, what's quite incredible is that it would never have been possible to obtain this information via the UK government for the simple reason that the Foreign Office or not the Home Office actually collect any data on this issue whatsoever. So they're not tracking the movements of individuals who may have been complicit in a genocide coming over to the UK. Instead, we obtain information via a Freedom of Information request issued by a lawyer in Israel to the IDF. And with that Freedom of Information request, we managed to get the total number of British Israeli dual nationals fighting for Israel, but also the total number of persons from several different nationalities. So the main ones were from the United States, France, Germany, and the UK. And this caused an international scandal, really, because obviously it was very important to find out how many British Israeli dual nationals had served in the IDF. But it was covered across Europe, it was covered in the US, it was covered in Australia, in several different countries. And, as I mentioned at the start, that we cannot find this information out through the UK government is frankly terrifying. And I think it's even more terrifying for members of the Palestinian community in the UK to think that they may be living next door to, a war criminal, or they may be interacting with someone who has, fought against their relatives, committed genocide against their relatives in Gaza, and is then working in public institutions in the UK, like the NHS, schools, the police force, and so on. So I think that's the significance of that finding.
So you mentioned how the UK government isn't tracking this data. Does that mean a freedom of information request or the open letter in the demand on finding out whether British Israelis have fought with the IDF? Does that mean we would never get an answer then? Because presumably all they can turn around and say is we haven't tracked it.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, if you don't track the number of IDF soldiers entering the UK, how can you possibly try to investigate them for potential complicity in war crimes, right? I mean, parliamentary questions have gone in on this issue to the Ministry of Defence, Foreign Office, Home Office, and they've responded by saying we simply don't have the data, we don't collect it. We've done freedom of information requests on this issue as well, and unsurprisingly got the exact same answer. I mean, if you think of Britain's geopolitical enemies, you can be sure that the state is monitoring their movements, particularly when they're entering the UK. But when it comes to those who have been fighting for geopolitical ally Israel, even as it commits genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza, the UK government is effectively indifferent. It simply doesn't seem to care about where these people are going and how often they're entering the UK, what they're doing once they're in the UK. So obviously the first step for ensuring accountability and justice for Palestinians in terms of the UK nationals who fought for the IDF is that the British government actually needs to collect data on who they are, when they're entering the UK, and what they have been, what military operations and what they've been doing while serving for the IDF. So, as I said, it's a very, very basic request. And I think the majority of the British public would actually be quite shocked to learn that this isn't already happening. I mean, it's as much as anything else, beyond accountability for war crimes, this is a simple public safety issue, right? To think that somebody can go from committing genocide in one country, come over to the UK and live amongst us is, I imagine, for most people horrifying.
Well, precisely, I suppose, even if you had a British Israeli who fought in the IDF, say they work in the NHS, has access to patient data, they know a particular patient is maybe Palestinian, there's a risk there. And our own citizens or Palestinians that are coming over here, they're completely at risk, which is wild when there's no data. There's something I wanted to contrast here. So what do you make of the fact that those who go and fight with Ukraine could be held accountable if war crimes occurred? Now, the Home Office explicitly says you could be tried for war crimes if that you in fact commit some kind of war crime, despite the fact that the UK unequivocally backs Ukraine. But if it's the IDF, you seemingly get a free pass. We've got a huge contradiction here.
Yeah, it is a huge contradiction, and I think that travel advice that you refer to encapsulates broadly, if you go to Ukraine, but particularly to fight on the side of the Russians, right? So if you fight for a geopolitical enemy, you're explicitly warned that when you return to the UK, you may be subject to criminal charges, you may be convicted. But when it comes to the IDF, there's no such warning at all. I mean, the issue is not raised whatsoever when it comes to the travel advice on the Foreign Office's website. So you see a clear double standard there. And I mean, that applies to several other cases. Obviously, there was Shamima Begum, who went over to join ISIS and subsequently had her wishes denaturalized. She had her nationality revoked, and now she's stateless. If you look at the kind of list of investigations and prosecutions that the Metropolitan Police's War Crimes Unit has conducted over the last 5 or 6 years, most of them relate to the geopolitical enemies of the UK. And then if you contrast that with how the Metropolitan Police has dealt with the pro-Palestine movement in the UK, I mean, even if you just take the past 2 weeks when they're, disseminating disinformation regarding, the marches going past synagogues and so on, there's been, political statements calling them hate marches, and you've simultaneously got thousands of people being arrested for holding placards which say, I oppose genocide, I support Palestine action. You can really see how the resources of the British state are being diverted or used to clamp down on the pro-Palestine movement, whereas when it comes to individuals who may have actually directly engaged in a genocide with the IDF, there seems to be no political will whatsoever to investigate them. Indeed, there's no attempt to even track them. They don't know who they are, and they don't care.
Yeah, interesting you said about the Met. I want to ask you about that. So, of course, Declassified covered it. Not too long ago, the Met came out and said they're not going to investigate potential war crimes committed by those who serve in the IDF. We've seen the behavior of the Met Police when it comes to peaceful protesters holding up placards. When did you find the links between Israel or Israeli think tanks and the Met? And what is the nature of that connection?
Yeah, so this was quite a concerning revelation that we made relatively early on in the genocide. I believe it was November 2023. And we went through the kind of register of interest kind of data from the Metropolitan Police, who they'd been meeting, what kind of gifts that they'd had. And what was striking was that the commissioner at the time, and who's still the commissioner, Mark Rowley, and several previous commissioners had gone over to Israel to speak at a think tank which is intimately connected to the Israeli security establishment. It was set up by former Mossad chief, several others who had served in high-ranking positions in the IDF. And so we've got, senior British police officers going to this Israeli think tank to discuss issues like terrorism and so on, and returning back to the UK. And who knows, what kind of lessons they are learning from the Israeli authorities. But obviously, given the way that the Israeli authorities, the security agencies particularly, treat the captive population of Gaza and the Palestinians as a whole, it should be very concerning that anything they've learned in Israel could be applied in the British context. Now, the other thing that we learned from obtaining Tzipi Hotovely's diary, now Hotovely is the former Israeli ambassador in London, was that she'd held two private meetings, one with Mark Rowley, one with his lieutenant, Matt Jukes. And now the public was never informed about these meetings. A freedom of information request to the Metropolitan Police asked what did they talk about. They said they could neither confirm nor deny that the meeting even took place. So I think what you start to see here is the development of a relatively cosy relationship between the Metropolitan Police and the Israeli state, which I think you could be quite confident in saying does not exist for the pro-Palestine movement or representatives of Palestine in the UK.
Could you, because obviously Mark Rowley was in the news in regards to Zach Polanski. Zach Polanski retweeted something he didn't like. Mark Rowley and the Met intervened on behalf of a political leader who was elected by a membership but isn't a sitting MP. Hasn't intervened in other political instances when maybe Nigel Farage accuses the police of two-tier policing. Could we pretty much say that we can make an assumption here that Mark Rowley and the Met have come down harder on left-wing and pro-Palestine organisations, including the Green Party, because the Green Party have come out and have called what's happening in Israel or in Gaza genocide, but also have said they want to suspend weapons to Israel. Could we, we're all assuming it, but could we say that there's probably an extra level of scrutiny from the police, given the pro-Palestine link from the Green Party?
Yeah, Mark Rowley's intervention with the situation with Zach Polanski, you've got to bear in mind that it really originated with Zach Polanski retweeting something that was critical, for sure, of the Metropolitan Police. And for him to intervene at the moment that he did, very shortly before local elections, which the Green Party were, projected to do incredibly well in, particularly in London, it did seem very much to me like an undue episode of interference in the political process. And, we can't say, without any shadow of doubt that, the kind of attack on Zach Polanski is linked to his advocacy for Palestine. But I think in a broader sense, you can see a general trend within the Metropolitan Police's approach to the pro-Palestine movement. And it wouldn't be surprising whatsoever if that extends to the politicians who advocate for Palestine as well.
That was John McAvoy from Declassified UK. I have to say, Declassified do absolutely fantastic work. If you're a viewer and you're not a reader or even a subscriber to them, you make sure you do, right? Read them, and if you want to give them money, absolutely do that because they do some integral work. But before we go on to our final story, you know what I'm going to say? It's 2026, and we really want this year to be big for Turn Left. We want to be more ambitious than last year and to really put us on the map. We would like 2026 to be the year where we can have a studio and for our contributors to be paid for the work we do. Your support over the years has been amazing, and we are ready to take this to the next level. We rely on small donations. So if you want to be part of a media organization that seeks to destroy the oligarchs, then please head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can support us monthly on Patreon, or there is another link for a one-time contribution. You can also become a YouTube member for 99p. On to our final story. Co-deputy leader of the Greens, Martin Ali, has been facing criticism for suggesting the Green Party are working class. Taking to Twitter, Ali said, "The Greens are the party of the working class. We are not here to play tag-along to Starmerism, the Northern accent. But many think the idea of the Greens being working class is absurd." Former Labour councillor P. Ray Armett said, "What a very bold, and some would argue, arrogant claim this is. Judging by most of your members and politicians I've come across, this isn't my impression. Overwhelmingly white middle-class people with a good social conscience." Restoration, a fringe group inside the Labour Party, which says its aim is to make Labour working class again, said, "Not only are they idiots undermining their one chance at power through PR voting, they also have now decided they are a party of working class people without a single trade union involved in their politics." Academic Lisa Mackenzie surprised me a bit with this one. Mackenzie is an anarchist, and her research is related to class and inequality. She said, "The Greens are not the party of the working class. They are the party..." Do you have graphic 12, by the way? Yes, we do. "The Greens are not the party of the working class. They are the party of the student activist, the bourgeois left, and the pro-Palestine fever. There is nothing working class about the Greens." Now, look, there's a subsection of people on the radical left, and I'm not saying that disparagingly. I'm part of the radical left, but there are people, I think, who view social liberalism as inherently bourgeoisie, and I don't agree that is, and I can only assume that's what she means by this. And of course, the comment about pro-Palestine fever, that's really odd. I mean, is it somehow not working class to oppose genocide? I mean, are not working class people being slaughtered in Gaza? Now, despite the cries of the Greens being middle-class liberals, and maybe that was once the case, maybe that was true beforehand, but polling shows that is not currently true as of today. When it comes to the well-off, the Greens have the least amount of support. And would you look at that, despite Labour figures calling the Greens middle class, they're supported by the well-off the most. When it comes to those who are struggling, Reform has support, and the Greens are just behind the Tories. But Labour, however, well, they have the least amount of support, joining with the Lib Dems. So according to this data, Labour are the middle-class party. Helena, are the Greens middle class?
So I think it's worth pointing out too, in that data that we just saw, even if you take it percentage-wise, even if you look at the makeup of the party in terms of the percentage that are financially precarious and the ones that aren't, the Green Party is second in terms of the most amount of financial precarity behind Reform UK in that case, right? So even if you do it percentage-wise before anyone comes and goes, "Oh, well, those stats you're not doing are percentage," it even works for percentage. Maybe not quite as much as Reform UK, but certainly significantly more so than the Labour Party and than the Conservative Party. Taking those comments that have been made so far, I'm not going to respond to the comments that have already been made. So I'll respond to David, who is the guy who runs the Restoration account, who says that there are no trade unions involved in the politics. Well, first of all, Zach Polanski literally was invited to do a speech at the National Education Union's conference earlier on this year. There are plenty of people who are close to the trade unions working with the Green Party. I have had many conversations myself with trade unionists, people within levels of high up trade union membership who are interested in making sure those links are stronger. And we have plenty of people who are trade union activists standing to be political candidates, to be MPs for the Green Party. So while we don't have established links with the trade unions like the Labour Party has historically, the idea that we don't have them on board, I don't think that's true. When it comes to the statement that was made by Lisa McKenzie, well, you can be all of those things. You can care about social liberalism, as you said. You can care about Palestine and radical activism, quote unquote, and be working class. That doesn't preclude working class people to have those belief systems. Now, I do think that when you look at kind of working class support for political parties, you look at financially precarious voters kind of split between Greens and Reform. There's also a split by age, which means old people are more likely to be right-wing, younger people are more likely to lean left and go towards the Greens, out of the financially precarious who go towards the anti-establishment parties, which is definitely what Reform and the Greens represent, whereas more wealthy people go towards the established parties like Lib Dems, Labour and the Tories. The split there, they split in terms of, I guess, social policy, that doesn't have any class relation. The idea that Lisa is kind of purporting here, which is that to be working class is to be socially conservative, bullshit. Absolute total bullshit. And someone who should have some understanding of class dynamics should know that that's bullshit too. I hear loads of people say, well, you can't be working class because you attack working class people when they present opinions that are socially conservative. But they're being attacked on the grounds that they're socially conservative opinions. People would make those attacks for rich people or for upper class people who make those socially conservative opinions because we're social liberals, right? Well, we're socially liberal working class people. A lot of the people who support the Greens are those things. That doesn't preclude people who are socially conservative and working class voting for another party. In terms of the material basis of the policy being proposed by the Greens, it's the one that has the most to benefit people based upon their material relationship to production. Higher wages, better trade union rights, better worker ownership of companies, a more functioning public realm paid through taxation of the ultra-rich. Those are things that will almost certainly benefit working class people in material sense, you know? Whereas a lot of these people are looking at kind of cultural things that they perceive to be working class. I know Lisa McKenzie grew up in the borough of Ashfield, grew up round the corner, actually, ironically, around the corner from where I live now in central Nottingham, but to the north in the more kind of ex-mining communities, that's where she grew up, near to where Andy Twelves grew up from Politics Joe. And she debated, or I was interviewed by Politics Joe, by Andy Twelves, about why she didn't think that the Greens were working class. And her position was basically, well, the people that I knew were part of the mining towns, and they're not like that because we're in a service economy. It's 2026. Manufacturing base has gone from 50% of our economy to 15% of our economy over the last 40 years. The modern day working class in this country work minimum wage service jobs. They are mostly like urban in terms of where they live, because young people have mostly had to move to the cities to get access to jobs because they're working in the service sector. And to try and have some kind of cultural understanding of what working class means, because it's kind of what it looked like when these people were of working age, is, again, it's missing the wood for the trees. When, of course, as we both believe as Marxists, Curtis, that class is a material relationship to production. Even Mick Lynch was saying it on the Telegraph podcast over the weekend, saying, well, I believe if you sell your labour for a wage, you're working class. I think it's maybe reductive in 2026, but I certainly am closer to that opinion than this weird cultural offshoot that is supposed to determine class by these people's assumptions. Like, yeah, that makes far more sense to me. And so you look at which way the policy goes. As for who's going to benefit people who sell their labour for a wage, of course it's the Green Party that represent the best policy perspectives for that material relation.
And that's the thing, what I have such a problem with Lisa McKenzie, because she's, I mean, don't get me wrong, we know so many right-wingers who base working class sentiment or whatever on vibes. You know, it's like either you have to subscribe to a particular set of views, i.e. immigration, because that seems to be the biggest signifier of whether you're working class or not in the mainstream media, is, well, are you pro-immigration or not? And the Green Party support open borders. By the way, that's not their policy. Therefore, they can't be working class. It's a really strange thing because, one, immigrants don't reduce wages. When people talk about immigration, they never talk about the demand side, that immigrants are literally demanding even the commodities, for example. they're also filling up the workforce, right?
It's
Those
called,
economics.
for people who don't know, that's called the lump of labour fallacy. The idea that the number of jobs is fixed is a really neoliberal construct because it implies that jobs are created by rich people rather than an emergent property of increased demand in the economy. Demand is what creates jobs. More migrants coming here demanding more goods and services means that more jobs have to exist to be able to provide them. That level of demand will lead to investment. That's basic Keynesian philosophy or Keynesian economics, right? And people who reject that are doing neoliberalism's job for them by implying that jobs are an entire facet of rich people's investment rather than the broader scale of the macroeconomy, you know?
Well, it's funny when people say, and it always reminds me to that the debate I had with I forget her name. She was a lord, and we were speaking about the comparisons of the UK and Norway, I believe. She was like, "Well, it's a different country. It's different over. It's like economies of a scale. They grow and contract, right? States can can handle that. That's why if you have more immigration, it's not like, oh my god, there's less jobs to go around. It's all relative. But again, I find it very strange when someone like Lisa McKenzie, who understands class, she's working class herself, is an academic in inequality. Presumably she understands it's all about the material conditions, have missed the trick on this. And actually, she's brought it back to culture and vibes, which is, because it's true. Look, the Labour Party has working class roots. The Green Party doesn't have working class roots, right? The Labour Party came out of trade unions, came out of miners, and obviously, working class movements across the country. And the Greens didn't. That's true, but ultimately the policies matter. And even if you want to talk about the culture inside the Labour Party, Sam Tarry was basically fired from the front bench for standing on a picket line. So, and I'm not saying that Mackenzie is saying that the Labour Party are working class. I'd assume she doesn't think that. But I find it so strange that she's all sort of piling on the whole idea that it's all about culture. And the thing is, though, what I find... look, I think there are some people who kind of look back, almost with rose-tinted glasses, and think, what we can do is we can create this working class versus elites dynamic again. And whilst the left populists like us try to do that, I don't think it's possible to ever be in a position in which you've got people just working at the factories and they're striking versus the bosses. The economy is far more complicated, partly thanks to Thatcher with the growth of the petite bourgeoisie, i.e. like small businesses and stuff, but also the precariat. So we are far more atomized. And I think like it's almost like blue labor to think we can go back to that really simple division between the factory owner and the worker. And in a way, it probably would be easier for leftists if that was the case, because there was that essence of common ground with workers. But now, because workers are so atomized, it's very hard to pull working class people together. And I think part of the project of the anti-revolution project is to sort of divide people based on social issues. But that world almost feels like it's gone now. You know, as you mentioned, we're in a service-based economy now, not industrial economy. So it's very hard. But right, let's all put down our tools and let's strike now. You've got to try and bring someone who's working for Deliveroo, someone working in a pub, at a restaurant, in a call center. It's a lot more difficult. And I feel like some maybe blue laborites seem to think it's really easy by just going, oh, let's just be anti-immigrant and transphobic, and then we just can bring the working class together again.
I think you're absolutely right, 100%. And I believe that it's kind of, I say rose tinted. It's kind of myopic, like booba slop nostalgia, really, to look back and think that to not bother getting with the times. I feel like there seems to be the single thing I find the most frustrating about dealing with the political and media class, even as you say, people who purport to be anarchists, right? That they don't seem to understand how things changed in the different world that we live in and the different material conditions that we have come into as young people in this country. And I'm like, you can't just divide people between blue collar and white collar in the way they used to do so before, where blue collar meant working class, because blue collar people earn more nowadays, right? Like, I was looking at the way in which the media in this country try and divide class, right? A, B, C1, C2, DE, which is the National Readership Survey. And I'm like, when I worked in a call centre minimum wage, I was purportedly of a higher class than an aeronautical engineer earning £60,000 a year. This makes fuck all sense. Makes fuck all sense in 2026.
They use their
and that's why-
hands though, so that's obviously working class, isn't it?
Well, that's why I think we have to go back to a more Marxist definition. Like, what's the shared material interest? If you want a political project, it's not going to be about cultural issues. It's going to be about the shared economic material interests between groups of people. As you say, in an atomized economy, in a more disparate economy, it's going to be harder. Like, we work from home more often. We find it difficult to organize. We find it even difficult to get on with people that we work with a lot of the time. And that's going to make organization far, far, far more difficult. But selling an economic prospectus that brings people together on shared economic interests is where that's going to lie. It doesn't matter whether you're blue collar, doesn't matter whether you're white collar, whether you live in Manchester, London, or whether you live in Middlesbrough, or you live in Stockton, or you live in Accrington, or you live in the Black Country, for example. There is a shared material interest between people who sell their labour for a wage, no matter whether they are doing that with their hands or with their brains or whatever part of the country that they're from. And of course, we can have discussions about regional inequality, about classism. Like, people will genuinely, there are some people who still have a negative view of blue collar workers because they have some level of classism still within them, and I think we can address those things. But a political project is about shared interest, and we could put aside differing opinions on cultural issues about when we are looking towards a shared economic platform. And there's to finish off here. There was an article by Matthew Paris, who's a Times columnist, from last year, I believe, about during the Green Party conference, I think it was released. And he wrote a very little short paragraph in the Times about how he was on the train next to two people who were discussing how they'd just come back from the Green Party conference. And one of them, he said she was very kind of middle-class, liberal girl wearing like colourful tights or whatever. Again, that doesn't have anything to do with class, but that's how he perceived her. And she was well-spoken in the same way that I am, I guess. And she was talking with somebody who he perceived to be more working class background, had a more regional accent, didn't dress in a kind of more the way that she did, for example. And he was like, but they're both talking about how they agree on all these economic issues. They agree about the problems of the economic elites. They agree with the Green Party solutions to tax the wealthy and to abolish landlords. And he was like, this will never work. This will never work because these people are too different because of their backgrounds. And I'm like, the opposite is true. The opposite is true. This is why the Green Party will do well, is because we have identified a unifying characteristic between these two people, regardless of their background, regardless of their interests, regardless of their cultural affiliations or whatever it is. They have realised that they share more than they differ when it comes to their relationship to production, the bourgeois and the oligarchs and the elite. They understand that shared interest, and that is a unifying thing that has brought the Green Party together. And as long as they have that shared unifying principle, the Green Party will be successful. It'll be successful on class terms. It'll be successful on the interests of the class that shares those two people's material interests. And that is how the Greens can win.
Let me throw something at you. So, whilst that's absolutely true and I agree with that, which is why, me and you have long argued for left populism, the sort of thing that Zach Polanski's doing, we've said that's a very good political project. And it is true. I mean, you can look at the surge in polling, in a slight dip for after media attacks, but I can see that going back up again. Look at the membership, massive swelling of membership, and even that anecdote of a potentially middle-class person understanding common material interest with a potentially working-class person. Absolutely true. Often when you have conversations with those that politically disagree with you, when you stick to material conditions, it is a winning formula. I think it's the only formula we've got at the moment. Having said that, I think that's bringing together maybe 20%, 25% of the country potentially. But I still think that's, and this is very hard for me to admit as a Marxist, as someone who says it's all about the material conditions. In reality, yes, but as a political project, I'm starting to wobble here. And what I mean by that is, as a Marxist, understanding that culture is actually very important. I always disparage the culture wars, especially if I'm arguing with a right-winger. I say, I don't care about culture wars. Me and you are the same. We're in the same economic system. Having said that, if you think about how trade unions came together and how I was talking about the sort of, being together in the factory against the factory owner, there's a cultural glue there, a cultural binding there in which we might not have right now. It's far more easier to organize people in the same physical space. And in a way, trade unionism, whilst it was all about the material, it was very cultural. And I think it's why you can see almost the cultural hangover of what working class means. Part of it is just because people are being silly, but I think another part is the very real cultural dynamics of being working class and being together in a union. I think that's a real thing which maybe us leftists, us Marxists should probably grapple with, because it is a lot harder to bring people together. And again, when you're working at different shift patterns, you know, if you're working a 9 to 5 in a factory, you can literally say we all need to stand together. Try doing that with someone working at night and someone working 3 jobs, and the different kinds of fields as well. Someone working manual labor and someone using their brain power. Again, it's all labor, but people derive culture from their work. Do you see what I'm trying to say here? It's a lot more difficult, I feel like, to organize. In a way, I almost feel envious. You know, obviously they had far worse material conditions. I'm not saying I wish I lived in that era. I'm very happy that we have far better living conditions and standards today. But in a way, I feel like as someone who wants to build a political project, I almost feel a little bit envious that it seems like it's almost easier to organize because it's very visual. You're right there in person, whereas today you're trying to bring different strands of people together. Do you see what I'm trying to say there?
I mean, that's why community organising is important. It's why I think the kind of malaise of left-wing politics in this country has been the lack of community organising. It's been the lack of trying to get out on the ground. It seems like a really small thing, but I'm glad that Green parties across the country engage in community litter picks every week, right? It's something little small that makes you visual. It makes you look like you care about the community. It makes it look less like a vanity project and more like a way of trying to bring people in. Just being visible is really, really important. But you're right, like trade unions have been far more difficult to organise, which is why we need to, in the current times that we're in, find a way of being able to circumvent those problems. And I think the internet is probably the best way of doing that. And shows like Turn Left and Novara Live and places like NoJusticeMTG. Whereas, of course, we are speaking to an echo chamber now. But look at what happened at the presidential election in the United States, where Trump managed to reach out to huge numbers of politically disaffected people by engaging culturally with like YouTube and things like that. Mm-hmm. It's not. There are new mediums of communication that can bring people together, that can get our message out, but can also mean that people understand those shared things more widely. Again, it's the organizing in a physical space is more important, but using what it means we have at our disposal of finding ways in which we can be more visible in the community. I think that's where the future is going to have to go, I think, because we can't just fix atomization overnight.
Yep, agree. I feel that's a good point to go to our comment section.
Comments.
Really excited. Lewis Aaron's with us tonight. Oh, you're not? Okay, give me a sec. Lewis Aaron is with us now.
Hello, how's it going? Great show.
It's good going. I was absolutely enjoying myself.
I love it. I'm loving our discussions about class. It's my favorite thing to talk about, I think.
It frustrates me because it's such it's a thick subject. It's hugely impactful, loads of different opinions, lots of different definitions. It's really, really interesting to get your teeth into. And I feel like so many of our incredibly fucking myopic and sclerotic media people who learned all of that at the class from what they were kind of learning as rote from learning PP at Oxford, essentially accepted the NRS social grade system as being definitional of class, then left it at that because it was an academic thing to study rather than, something that you should be trying to constantly update. It's why, again, I don't necessarily have much time for super orthodox Marxists. It's a lens of analysis, and that will, as you say, in a complex economy, require new ways of applying those methods of analysis rather than treating it like scripture.
Well, I mean, my old pub landlord, when I was working in a pub in Nottingham, was telling me how, he owned the pub. He also had another business, and I think he was a millionaire from it, right? A multimillionaire. And he was saying he's working class because he grew from a working class background. He's got a strong regional accent. And I was trying to say, like, was not trying to get fired. You're not fucking working class anymore. You are someone who owns some kind of means of production, whether it's your business or whether it's your well, the pub is also the business, but both businesses. You are a petite bourgeoisie. I didn't use those words on him. And it's like that understanding of, whoa, but he has a regional accent and he likes a pint. He must be working class. The same which like the image Farage tries to push on people because he can down a pint. But maybe, and this sounds so myopic, but maybe after Zach Polanski, the next left-wing leader needs to be like Mick Lynch, you can down a pint. I don't know. Maybe that's really reductive.
Yeah,
it does seem to be
Oh, go ahead, Helena.
So it does seem to be like in America, it seems to be working. The act like a chud, think like a woke dynamic seems to have been pretty successful.
Well, what you said about Graham Planter
like,
at the beginning,
or
at the top
Abdul
of
El
the show.
Sayed and people like that.
Mm.
There's going
I mean,
to
Abdul
a whole
El Sayed
conversation
doesn't have any
about
Nazi
cultural
tattoos.
class.
Yeah,
don't
he
you?
does have a Nazi tie. That's true. Sorry, Lewis.
No, I was going to say you can get into a whole conversation about cultural class, but I always just when people talk about this specific topic, even though it's not that old of a clip, I still keep thinking about like the David Beckham Victoria Beckham clip where she's like, "I am working
Literally.
class," and then
Yeah.
and then David's just like, "What car did your dad drive you to school in?" And she's like, she wouldn't say, and it's like, "Is it a Bentley? I think, or an Aston Martin? I think I can't remember." I don't know. It's just funny.
Because at least David Beckham grew up working class. He could at least be like, that's bullshit. Come on.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like Labour will say, like the Labour Party, there was a member of the Labour Party who got really mad. It was a guy called Sam Rushworth. I was debating him on Twitter, and he was like, Hannah Spencer is mocking working class Labour MPs by saying we're all drunk in the House of Commons. And I was like, are there working class Labour MPs in the room with us right now, Sam? And he was like, well, I grew up poor. And I'm like, your Wikipedia article says that you're a consultancy CEO. Bullshit, are you working class? Right? And the problem is that the Labour Party currently is full of people who would call themselves working class because, yeah, legitimately they grew up in, working class areas of the country and their parents did, manual labour back before we can change to a service economy. But they are the children of Blairism. They are people who came from those backgrounds, who got degrees and then became, highly paid professionals, right? And even if you go away from the Marxist definition of class and you take the role that their job has being highly paid and not being precarious, that probably is a better way of saying middle class than just doing a white collar job, right? They certainly are. Keir Starmer, son of a toolmaker, but hotshot lawyer, director of public prosecutions, has his own tax law in his own name for his pension, and was driven around in a limousine on the public expense, right? I don't call that working class. I don't think anybody would. But because they have this upbringing because they think their upbringing is what makes them working class rather than how they have made their money, how they have engaged in the labour market, they can say, we're the most working class cabinet in history, we were state educated. I'm like, but it's all lawyers. It's all lawyers and spads and political actors in the cabinet. Outside of like Angela Rayner, seems to be the only person who'd ever actually had a real like working class career, a pink collar career in terms of being a carer. Even Wes Streeting, who has the poorest background, he went straight from being, a student politician, right, head of the NUS, to being like a spad for the Labour Party. Like you've never actually properly sold your labour for like a proper wage to a private employer ever.
I always get comments saying that I'm middle class, and I went to university. One, I didn't go to university. I'm working class, but yes, I code my accent, right? I mean, I think before I started to turn left, like you probably could tell I sounded way more Bristolian. The only fucking asset I've got to my name is my laptop, which, to be fair, doesn't really change my material conditions drastically, which I use for turn left and paid work. So that's again all that cultural bullshit.
Yeah,
I'm a renter. I'm a renter. I have no assets to my name.
Have you considered a multiple landlord who wears a flat cap and worked in a factory 40 years ago is significantly more working class than you?
Yes.
You consider
Like literally, when you put it this way, it's crazy. Like people call Alan Sugar working class. Like
it's crazy. It's crazy.
Like, billionaire fucking landlord. He makes all his money from Amsprop, which is literally just a commercial property arm of Amstrad. Right? That's how he makes all of his money, just by extracting money in terms of commercial rents. He's literally like the most bourgeois person in this entire fucking country.
My favorite thing right now is watching Restore and Reform voters deciding which like privately educated, schooled, millionaire, billionaire backed person that they want to vote for, who's trying their hardest to appeal to the working class.
But that's sad, isn't it? Though that they're still duping a lot of people. That these people are working class. It's so sad. I know my dad told me, by the way, a while back. He said, son, the easiest way to make money is property. I said, no, sorry. He said the best way to make money is property. And I said, no, Dad, that's the easiest way to make money. Thank God my dad doesn't have property.
And Anyway,
Well,
let's do
let's,
some
I mean,
comments. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, it's one. I guess the last thing is it's one thing that I'm really glad that I was going to get. There was a moral lesson my parents taught me, right? And I know they never really kind of told me what kind of wages they made, and they were just like they were just like, why did you never like become a landlord during the 2000s when credit was super easy to access? You had well enough paid jobs, you'd passed a mortgage affordability assessment. Like every financial advisor in the fucking country was telling people from middle class kind of careers, you should invest in property for extra income because it's easy money. Because it was easy money in the 2000s with buy-to-let mortgages, and they were like, it's morally wrong. It's morally
Yeah,
wrong
it's
to do so.
so fucking based.
And I'm just like, yeah, I'm glad I was taught these moral lessons.
But if you ever want to meet the most oppressed group of people in the UK, go to r/UK landlords. Like they have had it. They have had it worse than slavery. Like honestly, just spend 5 minutes in there. It's hilarious. Right, we'll quickly do. We've got some lovely memberships. Michael gifted
you,
a
Mike.
10 left membership. Thank you so much, Michael. And then we had Katie Marshall gifting 10 turn left memberships.
Yes,
So
Katie
thank you very
Marshall,
much,
thank you.
Katie. And then the lovely Specs Bean Farmer donating 5 turn left memberships. So thank you very much. And another regular, Deus Ex Ollie,
Yes, Ollie.
gifting another 5 turn left memberships. So thank you very much. And then we had Benji here. Is that the same Benji here from TikTok? There's a TikTok influencer called like Benji who always starts his videos saying Benji here. If it's you, hello. And then
And
we
if
also got
not,
some
start TikTok.
yeah. We also got some donations. Terry Reagan said Brits who serve in the IDF should be given Shamima Begum treatment and banned from returning to the UK. I get the sentiment. I weirdly agree with Jacob Rees-Mogg's stance on the Shamima Begum case, but we could hash that out probably another time.
Although
Well,
to be fair,
I
though,
agree with you. I agree. I mean, Nigel Farage even said that she should be returned to the UK, and I agree with both of
Oh
them.
yeah.
She's our citizen. She's our problem. So are these IDF people. They should be sentenced as war criminals, just as Shamima Begum should have been sentenced as a terrorist in the UK.
although to be fair, though, Shamima Begum became stateless, whereas what if you're British Israeli? Can you not be like, well, you can't be British, but you can go to Israel?
Well,
Because
No,
they
because
have dual citizenship.
Israel won't hold them to account.
True
Nope.
that.
We also, Kate Marshall, who gifted memberships, also gave £2 and said, here's an idea, make the Scottish tax bans UK-wide. Don't have enough knowledge on
True.
those. I'm sure Helena does.
It's
What
progressive.
is?
It's more, but they're more progressive than the UK, basically.
Yeah. What's the highest income band on Scottish
Uh,
taxation? Because it's actually crazy to me how low the highest band on ours is. 45% is so insanely low. Especially, I think it's 40% and then 45%, and then that's it. That to me is crazy, especially during the Thatcher years. We will look at 70% marginal taxation on the highest.
Yeah, there are significantly more tax bands, so it's more graded than ours. Like the biggest problem I think with the UK tax system is that we don't grade it enough. I think the Scottish one is significantly
hardly
better
any,
than the one we have here, and it's so poorly designed. There's so many cliff edges. There's so many ways, which means that there are certain marginal tax rates at certain points that are like 600%. Student loan repayments even worse, like marginal tax rate there. It's an absolute fucking mess. The Scottish one's significantly better.
And there's all the other loopholes as well. Like Nigel Farage's troubles about his payment from I'm a Celeb is all because he put money in the business because he can get around certain taxes, capital gains, and there's just so many other things that could be gone after. We could talk about that all day.
Can I just quickly say, that one's gonna plug yourself away. Do not say I can't plug myself on the stream. If you make content, plug yourself. We'll show it.
I'm so glad that we get the people like Turn Left November Media have had this opinion, which is like we want to create an ecosystem. We want like more creators is always good. Katie's a streamer as well.
Yeah, it's not rude. In fact, the reason why I started Turn Left, is because what I saw in the US, I found there was just so many more left-wing content creators in America on YouTube. And this was back in 2020. So the only thing we really had was Navarra on YouTube. So the plan was to be like, oh, let's take over an existing thing. It's like, no, we need way more. So don't feel like you're being rude. Please plug yourself and then we'll show it on stream because it's so important that there's more people to watch.
Pro plug.
Pro plug.
We also got another. We actually got a plug and a donation for ourselves from Specs Bean Farmer, who gave £5. Thank you, Specs, and
Thank you.
said we usually hang out in the voice chat of the Discord after the show. All are welcome. Come and join the community. Can a mod please post a link? And I think it did get posted below. If anybody wants to post it again, that would be very helpful. Thank you very much.
I thought I'd show this one because I think we've got someone who makes content.
What just accidentally be advertising like,
Yeah.
really terrible
OF.
people. Clip this. But to go to, if we've got any more plugs, if you've seen any more, put them up. But I can go to just usual comments.
I'll keep an eye out for plugs, and you can carry on.
Like, let's start with this because we did get some pushback. I personally don't recognize this person as a regular, and the people got into a bit of heat below. But let's do some pushback because we're not an echo chamber. You'll never win over anyone by telling them they don't pay enough taxes. People are currently struggling to afford to live. Just to give context, this user was putting many comments. I can't show them all. But it was more.
I
to
have
this
seen
kind
Layla
of taste,
before,
yeah.
but I did
Turns
heart
out
that one.
it's true, but if you have a more all-encompassing public realm, if you have a better welfare state, anything that you pay in tax will return to you, and you'll be able to afford to live better. That's the whole point of an active state, is to make people's lives better. Having a more comprehensive welfare state will require more funding, but that means that you're getting back a lot of what you're paying back in. And again, people on the lower end of the income spectrum are the ones who get the most out of the state. They're the ones who receive the most in terms of state provision.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean,
and the reason why I hearted this one as well is that, like, even we're having a discussion now amongst us, but I'm not like suggesting like a a politician says, you don't pay enough taxes. That's a really bad strategy. I wouldn't ever advocate for that. Like, we can have more honest conversations because we're commentators. Again, a politician has to be quite careful with their language. I would never say you don't pay enough. But you can frame it as Helena framed it, though, is that at the end of the day, like, we have to protect the public realm. It's in, very, very wealthy people will use private jets as their transport. They're not going to be on a bus. When it comes to healthcare, they're probably going to take out private health insurance. The biggest transfer of wealth for working class people isn't actually just income. It is public services. Imagine if we didn't have a national health service. If we didn't have a national health service and we had to pay for healthcare, that's quite literally a transfer of wealth from working class people to the top 1%. That's why they don't have socialized healthcare in America, because it's a wealth transfer. So when we have good quality public services that are cheap, when we have free at the point of use healthcare, that's literally a wealth transfer to the working class. That's redistribution. And in order to protect that, we have to have a tax system that reflects that. Again, I appreciate that that's the argument we should be making. I'm not necessarily telling people they don't pay enough taxes, but we also have to be honest. Like, not too long ago, I said the Greens should adopt the £20,000 threshold because I thought it was a populist argument, and I've changed my view on it. I now think that everyone should be paying more taxes. We shouldn't shy away from things that I think are economic realities, but we have good ways of framing it, I think.
Yeah, but it's past 9 p.m, so I have to jet off now, by the way. But thank you, everyone, for pulling
Yes,
in.
okay. Thank you so much, Helena. I mean, me and Lewis could probably continue with the comments for a bit, but Helena, thank you so much for coming on. Of course, just quickly plug yourself. I know everyone knows who you are, but you might as well just
at NoJusticeMTG, every single platform. It's all at NoJusticeMTG on every single handle, every single one. So it makes it nice and easy for you.
every single one.
Every single one.
Okay, right. Let's see you later. Bye bye. Lewis, should I bring you in? No, but just do I bring your audio in? Okay, let's give me 1 second. Okay, you should be in.
Hello. Yeah, I couldn't say that I'm on. Obviously, we ran over, but thank you to Helena for staying for as long as she could. Almost like a continuation of what we were just talking about. Arthur Bumblefoot said, Curtis is right about taxes here compared to some European countries. We expect Scandi-type public investment and the results, but don't want to pay for it. Obviously, with a lot of spending is wasted. I brought up that comment just because about the wasted spending, because I always get frustrated because a lot of the right-wing libertarians, stuff like this, they always talk about like cutting and government waste and how it can be done so easily. But the biggest biggest waste, in my opinion, whether it's measurable or not, but I do believe there's lots of evidence for this, is how much we've obviously given to the private sector, even though it's still under the fund.
110%.
Yeah, even though it's still under obviously the
110%.
control of the government, like they're still facilitating the service through our taxes. It's insane how much we've obviously privatized. I always go to like private care homes because it was like 2 years ago when I think it was The Guardian who published just an investigation into one company, and there are dozens, and they were bringing in 300, 400 million pound profit. So that's on top of the billions we pay them. Then that's their profit margin, and that's just for literally children's homes. It's absolutely wild how much these private companies are making off of
So,
us.
yeah. So, and that's the thing. Like, the state is actually very bureaucratic, but of course, when the right wing say about wasteful spending, they mean austerity. Let's be honest, that's what they mean. They want to cut essential public services. But you're absolutely right. The number one thing I think, which is wasteful spending, is privatization and PFI. I mean, the Private Finance Initiative was basically saying, or basically said, let's borrow loads of private investment. We're going to defer that payment maybe long after I'm not prime minister anymore and I've got to deal with it. And you've got to pay their profits. So you're literally spending more money if you use through private avenues rather than just state spending. That's a bureaucracy and wasteful spending we should get rid of. And to do that, you need to completely end privatization of public services. Get rid of all private contracts in the NHS because it's not just wasteful spending, it's also incredibly bureaucratic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to use this comment to plug Declassified, actually. So, Flow Snake said that, do we have an extradition agreement with The Hague? It should, I really should know that. So, I'm going to plug Declassified because obviously John McAvoy did a lovely interview. They did a big investigation, I don't know over the years, but the most up-to-date one, I think it's called Censored, Keir Starmer's emails about Israeli war crimes case. And they did a big investigation. We used to have this thing, we still technically have it, it's called universal jurisdiction, where if somebody is accused of war crimes internationally, if they come to a country, you can apply for an arrest warrant and then they can be arrested. It's done by a judge, and then they could be shipped off to The Hague. We did this process in 2008. An Israeli minister was coming over called Zippy Livni, and this is all in the Declassified article. This was just after Operation Cast Lead, where they killed 1,600 Palestinians, over 300 children. And a group applied for an arrest warrant. A judge approved arrest warrant for this Israeli minister who was visiting the UK. And then the government stepped in. The Israeli minister didn't come. And then between both Labour, including Gordon Brown, because I know some people still give him praise, and he deserves praise for certain things, but he deserves massive, massive criticism for this, basically went on a campaign to change the law. It didn't actually change till the Tories came in. But basically, they changed the law, so no longer could a judge approve it. It now goes to the head of the CPS, which the second time the person came to the UK, or was planning to, the case went to none other than Keir Starmer. He had it on his desk for a few days, and he didn't approve it, he didn't decline it. And then David Cameron gave Zippy Livni retroactive special mission status, even though she was no longer a minister for the Likud government, and she was allowed to come to the UK. And ever
How's
since
that
then,
even legal to do? If she's no
yeah,
longer a minister and it's retroactive.
yeah.
That's crazy.
Declassified have done this entire investigation into it. It's wild. Like loads of people are implicated. Everyone from Gordon Brown to David Miliband to David Cameron. It's an absolutely wild and crazy story. But yeah, and just to give you, I'll quickly give this quote from Zippy Livni, where because it's just so wild, like how terrible these people are. We know how terrible they are, but she said that. I am a lawyer who doesn't believe in law, especially international law. When you attack our country, we will go wild on you and we won't care. Referring to the, almost 2,000 Palestinians that they killed in Operation Cast Lead. But anyway, I just thought I'd share that with people because it's a really, really amazing investigation by Declassified.
They again, I can never praise Declassified UK enough.
Yeah,
They really do exceptional work.
Yeah, censored Keir Starmer's emails about Israeli war crimes case. That's the title of the article. Continuing on the same story, me again. I was going to say Megan, me again. Bloody hell, given the way soldiers behave, what jobs are they doing? If there's 2,000 of them, they'll be doing all sorts of jobs. They'll probably be teachers, police officers, could be working in
I
a
mean,
local
and that's the thing.
supermarket.
What is so sad, which is what John said, is that you could be, if you're Palestinian and you're in this country, you could have interacted with someone who potentially could have killed your family member. You
Yeah,
could go to the doctors, and there could be a health worker who served in the IDF, and you're the patient and you're Palestinian. And
yeah,
given the genocidal culture that's in Israel, it's not just the government, which I think liberals like to say, oh, it's just the Netanyahu government. No, it's pervasive in Israeli society. We've seen the polling, we've seen the vox pops, we've seen Abby Martin. She went in 2012 to Israel. She did the interviews on the street, and they all had genocidal intent because they're brought up that way. An Israeli doctor. To be honest, who knows that this Israeli doctor may not give the best quality of care because they know this person's Palestinian. These are all things that can happen. I don't want to scare people, but we also have to be truthful, which is why it's so important. If this government cared about the British people, cared about people in this country, you would even track the data of British Israelis going and fighting for a terrorist organization, which is the IOF.
yeah. It's absolutely crazy and wild. It truly is. Um, on another plug, I actually marked this before we even talked about plugs. I've never listened to this podcast, but it's just a plug. Yori Gibson says, "Hello, lovely people. Hope all is well with you all. Fighting for humanity. Just watch Palestine deep dive podcast about Arsenal and the Kronik's sacking of the Arsenal kitman of 22 years and suing him. So just another plug there for a podcast if anybody is interested."
I'm
Um,
sorry, quickly bring up this,
go on.
Rebecca. You are right. It's probably very, very unlikely. So yes, just I think it's probably important to raise that with Becca. Like it's still very, very unlikely.
Yeah. Well, either way, like we let the war criminals into this country all the time, but they come on diplomatic statuses anyway. We are the war
Mm.
criminals too, as in the country, the government. Terry Reagan said that they saw an article on Instagram by Navarra that both Clive Lewis and Richard Bergen, I haven't seen this, I don't know if you have, will be debating
I saw
Greens
a
if
tweet from
Burnham
that
doesn't
Politics
win.
UK account.
There's always lots of rumors going around, so whether it's true or not. Sometimes people actually purposely put rumors out because they don't intend to do them, but just to add pressure. So you like, I like Richard. I've got time for Clive. However, people still play political games, so it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to
Well, I
see what
mean,
happens after.
what's your thoughts on that? Let's just
Um,
say it's kind of it's true. I don't think it's true, by the way, but let's say it is.
um, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I feel like it's almost like you can't comment until you see how kind of like the election
Mm.
plays out because I expected, I saw Helena's video earlier, a clip from her stream about her talking about the polling around reform and Labour and how like Labour's own, well, Andy, that's to say, is like 3 points ahead, but all this reporting is coming out, which is going to almost like make it easier for Andy to potentially win because the reporting on that reform candidate is insane. It's like way bigger than most of the
Yeah.
candidates have
Well,
faced.
I mean, more in terms of like, do you like this? Do you think it's a good idea? Like, would you be happy for them to join? Because in one sense, I'm like, maybe it adds some kind of legitimacy. I mean, it's not like the Green Party are struggling for legitimacy. I mean, they're getting attacked more, which just shows they are legitimate. But it could add to that legitimacy. The other sense, though, is they could go with the reform problem, which is that loads of people hate the Tories, and now half of them are Tories. So that they've lost polling or they lost support through that. Is that going to be the same for Labour? I think the dynamic between Labour and Green is different, though. I think like this is purely in my own head. There's no data to, I don't think that really backs us up. Is that like you've got those floating between Labour and the Green? They could vote either way, and they're being pushed towards the Greens. Whereas I think there's a more of a visceral hatred between Reform and the Tories. Not saying there isn't hatred of the Labour Party going to the Greens, but I could see could you see half of Reform support going back to the Tories if Boris Johnson was leader or someone else was leader? I can't see that, but you can see a real effect of the Greens losing support if Andy Burnham becomes leader. So there's that issue, and also, do you want Labour MPs? I know they're on the left. I think Bergen is probably slightly more left wing than Clive, but do you also want these people? They stuck around in the Labour Party amid a genocide. Surely we should have some new, fresh left wing talent.
Just to point out, because again, I said I haven't seen this full article. Pseudonymous has said unnamed sources claimed they would resign. Nothing about going green. So I don't know what the actual true story is. So just to point out that to the audience, because we don't want to misinform them.
But the
Yeah,
hypothetical, I suppose, isn't it?
yeah, like I feel like obviously you can take the argument of like, if you disagree with the party leadership in any situation, obviously genocide is the highest crime. You can say that if everybody just to simply abandoned the party, then you're just giving into that party and then they get complete and full control. Whereas like these people have kept the infrastructure to potentially change Labour in the future by not leaving and standing and fighting, which obviously, people, someone like Richard Bergen has actually fought. He got suspended. He's been consistent pretty much throughout all of this period. Maybe people can push back on certain votes, but as far as I'm aware, Richard has. Not too sure on Clive. Obviously, I know he's been in opposition to Starmer for quite a long time. However, I think this is just my opinion of Burnham. Like, even though he's obviously to the left and presented himself that way, he is still a centrist guy who I think, like, correct me if I'm wrong, did vote for the war in Iraq and advocated for it.
For the
I
war in
think.
Iraq, he was a Labour member. Sorry, he was a member of LFI.
Yeah, exactly.
He
And
voted for PFI. He has a very, very dodgy voting record.
I feel like with Starmer you get this almost like blank slate when you go back to who he originally was. You didn't really know much about him. Whereas with Burnham, I see him as a complete flip flopper. I think he's got all the recipes of being a proper centrist, and that he's trying to appeal to all sides. That almost the Labour Party is setting themselves up for failure by putting their eggs in the basket for Andy, and thinking you're going to get that much of a difference change. Maybe
Well,
I'll
they
be
don't
proved
have
wrong,
anyone else,
but I
to be
think.
honest.
But I think if they were going to leave, they should just leave, regardless of Andy or not, because I just don't think personally there's going to be even that much change, even if Andy gets into power anyway. Obviously, Wes is the continuation, and Andy will be different, but I think he's still gonna. I think he'd still be the prime minister who gets up and celebrates mass immigration numbers. Maybe says some bad words about Israel, but I don't even think, as far as I've seen, for like Israel, for example, I don't think he's offered any further action or anything actionable in any way. I don't think he's offered really anything that's a solid plan to differentiate from where the current Labour government currently is in any way. I haven't seen that much of it. He's said things, but there's no policy. I don't think he's going to offer that much of a difference, really.
I agree. I think you're right. I do think you're right. And this is someone who, I changed my position on supporting a candidate in Makerfield. I think the best case scenario was having a candidate, but having a sort of low key campaign, because I want them to get the mayoralty. I think there's a chance there. So I'm not saying they should do like a full throttle campaign, but before I was like the Greens shouldn't stand, because whilst I never thought that Andy Burnham was left wing, I wasn't basing him on what he was saying. I was basing him on how he ran Manchester, and he did put buses into public control and did a few other things. So I thought at least he might marginally move Labour to the left, maybe, or he could get concessions like PR. But before the official campaign began, he U-turned on so many things. I mean, he's now not even saying he supports PR. The most damaging thing I think is the fiscal rules, which you can't do anything if you're going to accept Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules. Of course, when it comes to immigration, he says I'm going to support Shamima Begum, and I think he's been a complete pussy when it comes to the EHRC.
Yeah, and I brought this comment up as well because obviously people need to consider their own constituencies when they're resigning or defecting. Because I'm from Leeds. I'm from Leeds West technically. I'm under Rachel Reeves, but Leeds East is Leeds East is a quite mostly mixed but very working class area. And just looking at the last election, Bergen got 18,000 and Reform did like 8,000. When you consider where Reform are at now, it would potentially put Bergen at risk. So he has to consider stuff like that too.
There's no safe seat for Labour.
Yeah, exactly. And I've got no idea where Clive stands, so I can't even comment on that.
He's in
I
Norwich.
can imagine the people of Leeds East would definitely give a massive boost to a Reform candidate because, again, Bergen stands out. However, how much of a good relationship does he have with his constituents based off of what he's been working on? Because some people, and this is a fair comment, whether people disagree with it or not, some constituents who just care nothing for the Middle East are annoyed at people who just constantly talk about international politics. and not like what's happening in their constituency, which some people like Zara and Richard Bergen have had that criticism before. So
But
how
do you know
annoyed
what
their
though?
constituents are,
But
who
about
knows?
that, first of all, Clive's in Norwich, and apparently the Greens are polling very well. Like it's possible the Greens will win in Norwich anyway. About talking about international issues and the heavy criticism from the media, which is that this is not Gaza, this is local elections, or you're a constituency MP. Gaza comes up on the doorstep a lot among all communities. So regardless of race, religion, gender, faith, it comes up unprompted. That's a lot of candidates for the local election said that. Eden Hills, who I spoke to, who won, he's now my councillor in Little London and Woodhouse. She said it literally comes up all the time, and I do think that Gaza is so salient. I think that's why when when asked on the radio to Zach Polanski, they said, "Is Gaza on the ballot?" And he said it's on the ballot. And I think he said that because he knows it genuinely comes up a lot. A lot of people are disgusted, which shows at least there is some kind of common humanity among people in this country. I think they don't like genocide.
Yeah, and as people are pointing out, this type of comment has come up a few times in what we were talking about. Burnham lost me when he came out in support of Bridget Phillipson and Shabana Mahmood's policies, which he has in lots of ways, just other policies too. He is in that comfortable position, and he's gained popularity from it by being able to both praise the government and also completely criticise them, which is why he is so popular, because he did it with the Tories too. He's done it with Labour, and now he's in this position where he's trying to appeal to all sides, which again could be his downfall.
People have said, though, that look, the reason why Andy Burnham said he supported the fiscal rules, it was all political play, because he said it to ITV, and he also, more importantly, said it to Bloomberg, simply because, and I get it, simply because had he said anything else, the markets would have wobbled. And whilst that's not because the markets wouldn't wobble because he would have been bad for the economy, it's because they like stability. And if there's any indication that economic policy might change, investors get scared. And of course, he didn't want to hurt his chances, right? So again, I still think you should be like, I'm gonna be responsible spending. Just use that line without specifically committing to Rachel Reeves' his fiscal rules. But I guess what Face Off is saying is you can't even use the guilt argument, which is that, well, he's kind of had to do that. When it comes to the EHRC and immigration, it's crazy. He could have just said, of course, we're going to have controls on immigration. And he could have just said, well, I don't know. I think he was just a pussy when it comes to the EHRC.
Can I just say fuck off to the markets in so many ways? I'm so fed up of hearing about like, oh, Rachel Reeves didn't have a usual shit this morning. The bond markets have gone down by 0.4%. I'm so like, we never used to hear this argument. So, oh, Rachel's hair's a little bit messy this morning. It's affected the bond markets. It just pisses me off. Sorry.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, though. We are in ad hoc to the bond markets because that's where we get our funding, because we borrow from investors, and we don't necessarily have to. We can central government can pay for things, but that would take a radical change of way we fund government. Which again, as someone who supports modern monetary theory, that's where I think funding should come from. But at the moment, we do use investors to fund things. But again, and I've said this so many damn times, even though we are technically in hoc to the bond markets, it doesn't mean you have to support orthodox macroeconomic thinking, because John McDonnell went to the City of London and said, we're going to raise taxes, we're going to spend lots more money, we're even going to use quantitative easing. But they laid out their long-term economic strategy to the bond market. So we're not in a hook to the bond markets where we have to do what they want. We just have to communicate in a way, a long-term strategy to them. But it is kind of sad that, like, yes, market fluctuation because Rachel Reeves cried in Parliament shows that it doesn't feel like we're in a democratic society.
It doesn't feel like reality. I brought up this comment. This will be the last comment. Yeah, no, I agree. Obviously, I am going off anecdote, and I'm happy to like express that. I come from a ridiculously oversized family in Leeds. My nana had 9 kids. I've got like 50 plus cousins, and they're all over Leeds. And consistently, depending on who your crowd is and who you interact with, unfortunately, that is what I hear from the majority of my family. So it is anecdotal. I can say that, but unfortunately, my dozens of family members constantly go on about. It's not just like Gaza or anything like that. It's just anything. It's Iran, Gaza, America. We're fed up of hearing about it. Who's going to fix our potholes? I was kind of just tapping into that kind of mentality that some people have been reported from. I'm not saying it's wrong or right. I'm just trying to do it from the anecdotal perspective of like local electoral criticism that has been expressed by some people, not as like a matter of fact, just to clarify.
I put up this comment there for you as well.
What is it?
Read it.
Well, Lewis, if you're going to bring up the @FuzzNate comment, you could also read my exact same point from earlier. Sorry, Vicky.
Is that it? Or have we got more?
If you want more, I can give you more.
No, I'm not 8, to be fair. So, and this has been an extra long show. We don't usually do this. We don't usually carry on when the guest leaves, but I guess...
We've got lots of viewers still here as well. I'm surprised people aren't getting ready for bed yet.
I mean, I think we were raided in as well, so a few people did join us. Lots of people like long streams, so I do quite like it when when there's like local elections and we'll do like a discussion panel, and they're usually like 2 hours long. They're quite cool.
Yeah,
but doing that every night is probably a big ask.
A lot of these like big famous like American streamers, they do like 24-hour streams and stuff, don't they? And they do like
crazy.
they have like a camera crew who walks around with them like live, and they'll be literally on live for 10, 12, 14 hours. It's just wild.
Yeah. I can assure you, no matter how big Turn Left gets, we're not going to be doing 24-hour streams.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
But we can leave it there. So thank you very much, everyone.
Cool.
And we'll pass it back over to you. Oh, I'm still on the thing. I'm just going to mute myself. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much, Lewis, for producing wonderful comments. Unexpectedly long show today. Why not? Midweek. And of course, thank you, Helena, for joining us. I know she left a while back, but of course, I'm going to thank her again. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you to all of your donations and your comments. Remember, if you want to support us, because we are not funded by anyone apart from you, you can go to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly, or there is another link to a one-off donation. Alternatively, you can become a YouTube member for just 99p. I'm Curtis Daly. Normal Island airs Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 7:30 p.m. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.